Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Salt Mine. This is episode 12, perhaps our last episode of the split. I guess depends on whether you count the promotion tournament as this split or the following split. But it's going to be our last split about the playoffs at the very least. My name is Gordo. I am joined by Nyarko, TDS, and rejoined by Bonfire. Welcome back after quite a few weeks away. About a split away, I guess we could call it, here to gloat
Yeah,
about the Dignitas performance.
maybe just a little. I'll leave most of it till later, but that is kind of my, as you know, Slayer, who also hasn't been here for a while, as he would normally say, I have a lot of my real name, Lucas takes. He says he calls them Lucas takes when I say something bad, but this was a good Lucas take. This was a bonfire take. Proud of
We'll rename it for only when it's
it.
correct.
Yep.
And then you look back at the bonfire takes and they're like, damn, this guy really knows what he's talking about. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. We'll see if I have any more. I looking back at some of my predictions, I also have some bad ones, but
Yeah.
I'm proud of that one, that specific one. But it's good to be back. Jokes aside, it is good to be back, and I'm ready to talk, gentlemen. I'm very ready to talk about what
I
happened.
know we've been putting off starting this one for a while. We've been talking in the Discord for like a half an hour. So yeah, we can definitely get started here. So we'll have plenty of stuff around the scene to talk about. We got to talk about MVP. We got to talk about CLG TSM news. But let's talk about the series that closed out the season here first. The biggest series of the split. I want to say the year, but summer could have some bigger series still ahead of us. Let's start off with losers finals, which was between Team Liquid and Cloud9, where our greatest fears came true. We talked about last week a little bit. Like, if TL just gets slammed here, it probably means that just the talent gap might be a little bit too high, and Cloud9 and Dignitas being filled with former LCS players were maybe just destined to reach the finals. And it does end up working out that way. TL doesn't really manage to level up quite enough to take down C9 here, and C9 does show up back in the form that I'm more used to seeing from them. They look a lot better across this week, leading to their eventual win. So let's start off with TL versus C9. What do you guys think of this series?
Well, before we talk about the series, I want to say hats off to Team Liquid. Obviously, I'm a huge Team Liquid fan, but from ninth to third, it was an incredible split from them, and that's after losing most of their team, the bottom half of their squad, to the LCS. Ayla, Jan, Harry, all going to the LCS and becoming stars in their own right. Ayla not as much, but everyone else. And so it's incredible to see what they had done. We'll talk more about Team Liquid, spoiler alert, as this podcast goes on, because they had some incredible standout players, but unbelievable stuff from the Team Liquid boys. And you really have to go to the coaching there. Spawn staying there, managing this team. And I think that at the beginning of the split, we talked about EG and C9 having some of the best talent systems in the LCS or in North America. And I think Team Liquid has to be up there now as one of the best talent creation in North America. And I would, in my case, I'd argue number one.
At least on the NACL front. LCS,
Yeah,
we
but
can talk
they,
about that a different day.
they brought people to the LCS. I mean, I'm just talking about bringing people
All
to
the
the
way
big
from
stage.
Korea.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that's fair.
But isn't that like the best academy you can bring from just Korean players and make them play the best possible? That's a pretty commendable, I guess, to a certain degree. I will say though, I as the biggest TLC believer, this series hurt me to my soul because I really think they could have done it. Like I think that the difference between Cloud9 and TLC wasn't that big in my eyes. But the biggest thing is that for some reason TLC stopped playing with their biggest like win conditions in that series. Over prioritizing Annie, stopping from giving a lot more damage oriented champions to APA, and then they played for their objectives like they were doing all split long. Something that we talked about last week, how they were consistently controlling objectives over on the ball side, and they still did in this series. But like their utilization with those objectives, without the damage coming in from the mid lane that they were lacking, felt like they never had an extra like plan to follow up through there. And I think Bradley had a much better series than in their previous series against Fear.
While I do think Bradley looked pretty good in lane, He held up well against Fake God all in all, I would say. I find it strange, and it's kind of hard to, maybe I should have reviewed the series a little bit more before coming on to record this podcast, especially with all the downtime we had, but I didn't. So I'm going to talk in hypotheticals and assumptions here. There were so many fights that Cloud9 gets to take 5 versus 4 versus Team Liquid without Bradley present. Like, that is what blows open the game in nearly every game, even in the game that they win in game 2. Like, there are multiple 5 versus 4s without Bradley that give what was an early lead for TL back over to C9. And then, like, Diplex shows bot, and Team Liquid ends the game from 7k down. That was super weird. And for that reason, I kind of think this should have been a 3-0 for C9. Like, I don't think C9 should have lost that game 2. I think they were back fully in control, and just, Diplex shows bot at the wrong moment. And TL pulls the trigger, and they close it out, and that's something they've always been good at. So, they deserve the credit for finding their win condition and capitalizing. But that's the thing. I've been so critical of Bradley all season, and this is like the one time that I don't just want to be like, Bradley's underperforming. Like, it's not like he's not TPing. It's like Cloud9 were able to force angles where Bradley could not join. They've capitalized on TP being down. They capitalize on fights where, they pull the trigger just a little bit too fast, and there's nothing that a TP can do to turn it around. So I am more tempted to give that, like, as a credit to C9 rather than Team Liquid misplaying. But yeah, it is those 5 versus 4 odd-numbered fights that let Cloud9 pull themselves back into it, even though they do tend to fall behind in the early games, as Team Liquid is still able to execute that game plan with Mir.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that surprised me the most, because when you also look at the first game, that could have been a 2-0 for TLC for the first 2 games.
That's
with
true.
how it went, because even though the first game does start better for C9, like, just a couple of fights here and there that changed, that I want to give credit to C9, because I think that TL overcommit for things that they don't really need to, and in a point in the first game where they were, like, just composition wise, they were ahead. They just needed to play that better, and they could pull it off. But that could have been a 2-0 start for TLC in that series, and I think that just with the momentum probably can pull it off. But like you're saying, C9 just managed it out better, and it really just showcased differences in teams. Even though I do think that they were closer than probably expected initially, they did showcase the difference in teams, really, in those situations where it just went much more in favor of C9C.
And it really just kind of feels like, in retrospect, that TL didn't have much of a chance, as tragic as it is, because there's kind of 2 ways that you can read that second game. One of them is if TL from there on forward was more competitive, you could look at that game as a turning point in the series. It shows TL's classic charisma, classic tenacity that they can then kind of leverage into deeper runs. But as it currently stands, I think that this is not a fitting end for TLC, because they did impress up until this point, but it is the expected outcome. And frankly, there was just so many elements that were going so cleanly in favor of C9 throughout that entire series that, yeah, I'm surprised, Gordo, that this wasn't a 3-0. It's virtually a 3-0 when you just look at the raw performances. In particular, Diplex looked so good here. They had an incredible time in the laning phase, or slightly post laning phase, just mounting and really building up huge leads. And from there, it just felt like APA, especially in the latter half of the series, just never was able to bring the same level of utility to team fights or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the mid lane pool was super weird to me for Team Liquid also this series. I think TDS is really onto something. They're talking about the Annie priority. That's a bit odd to me, how much priority they put on the pick. I mean, I get that it's broken, and a lot of teams are putting really heavy priority on it. But it just feels like so much of what got TL here, and noting that the whole series was played on the same patch, so much of what got TL here, right, was those like core 3 champions for APA, the Cassiopeia, the Ziggs, and the Ahri. And we never see the Ahri this series. The Cassiopeia gets banned all 4 games. The Ziggs gets banned some games. It gets through other games. And it gets picked in the final game. And they're not really able to do anything with it. But I don't know. That just makes me feel like a little unsatisfied with Team Liquid. The fact that APA goes out playing 2 games of Annie and a game of Lissandra. yeah, I don't know. Just feels like it's not really how they found success throughout this split. Even though, like, strategically they did. They still played their early game aggressive strategy. They still played around Mir. All of that was still there. But specifically the picks, I feel like they really did not give a chance for APA to be like that X factor that he's been in some of their darker moments throughout this split.
Yeah, I feel like this was almost a formality, like this was gonna happen. It was crazy that they made it this far, but I feel like when I did watch Team Liquid, when I could, it felt like there was always this impending cloud that, like at a certain point, this squad that was, so new to each other and had a lot of them, their first split in either Academy or their first split in NA. In my eyes at least, it just felt like at some point something was going to go wrong. And you need, as we saw from both of the teams that got top 2, you need players who have been here before, who've been in these positions before. And I feel like those veterans can really help you out a lot. And I think C9 just had that. I think you look at Cloud9's roster, you talked earlier about how it's a lot of former LCS players. When you have people who've been in these high pressure situations, they just know what to do when the pressure gets high. And I don't know. Diplex made a mistake. This was his first split. Obviously, that's how Team Liquid got their spot. But Fake God never really stumbled at all, and the rest of the C9 boys followed through. So I don't know. I feel like Team Liquid are actually going to be. I'm like my early prediction here. I think they're going to be top 2 in the regular season next split. I think they've got a really strong team. I just think they need a little bit more experience, and I think this was the series we saw that lack of experience come out.
Speaking about next split a little bit, as we do our send off to Team Liquid here, I'm not. I mentioned it before. It's now starting to get into a little bit more of the mainstream discourse. I know I Will Dominate did a tweet about it. Team Liquid main should maybe be taking a look at Mir here, as maybe a promotion candidate, and that's the only thing that makes me hesitant to predict them super high next split. Although I guess world champion Pioshik coming down to NA Academy would certainly be an interesting one.
In less than a year.
It's crazy, man. It
Crazy.
happens.
We'll say we did have Piglet and Phoenix playing
True.
in Academy for one moment. So Piglet already did it.
Piglet did already
World
do
champion.
it. It did happen.
World
It
champion
happened a
playing
couple
in
times,
AUCL.
actually. Piglet went
Yeah.
to Academy on Team... He went to Challengers on Team Liquid for a bit, and he also went to Academy on Clutch Gaming.
Good old times.
Throwback
He was like
there.
nothing.
But yeah, no, I mean, jokes aside, I really do think Team Liquid should be paying a close eye to Mir right now. I mean, he just won his most valuable prospect. We'll talk about controversy for that in a little bit. But I do think he's quite good. I think he'd probably be solid in the LCS. Pioshik has been very unreliable for Team Liquid in the main team. And Mir speaks Korean. So he would be still keeping with that strategy. I know they're very committed to Core JJ wants to comment Korean, so our whole team needs to speak Korean. So promoting APA and stuff, not really an option, assuming that they aren't abandoning that strategy in mid-season. But Mir still is an option.
I think Pioshik just needs maybe 2 more splits before he gets enough English to just become like a content creator or something. Because you got to look at like his trajectory and think that there's no way that TL or anyone else in NA is going to be paying the contract that he most likely signed this split coming in after being world champion and whatnot. I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong, but it seems wild.
He is on a 1-year deal, by the way. I feel like this got really under-discussed in the offseason, but Summit and Pioshik are on 1-year deals. Like, Team Liquid is really, like, they did not throw their full weight behind this plan. They were like, we're going to try it out first. And, maybe for the best, given how their spring went. But yeah, Pioshik is not on a long-term deal. All right, well, with that said, something to check out. Maybe we see Pioshik in NACL next split. Let's move on to Cloud9 versus Dignitas, which ended up being our grand final. It was probably written up that way from the start, right? I mean, everybody could see it from their run to winners finals to meet each other. These were the top 2 teams all season long, and they did not miss a beat the whole way through. Rallies from Team Liquid and FlyQuest and Fear aside. And a controversial end if you're Nyarko, which I'm sure he won't be able to help talking about here, because they do end up going 4-4 against each other in playoffs. They end up going 5-5 against each other across the entire splits, and nobody ends up leading there for spring 2023. But Cloud9, they do pull it back together. They do look more like their original selves than they did in the first series against Dignitas, and they end up taking it 3-1.
Just to preface here, Gordo, it isn't like you guys afforded me time or something during this part of the podcast to talk about the controversy, but we'll get there for sure. I think it's probably best if we just start off by accessing the series as it currently stands in the 3-1 that occurred.
Fair enough. I think one thing that I wanted to quickly mention with the C9C Dixie final, like apart from the fact that I think it actually showcased how it should be expected, because I feel like Dixie's win was more of an overperformance than them being better than C9C. I also think that C9C had a big overperformance in this last series, and it was Tomio. He performed way better than he has done all split long. That was not the typical Tomio we saw, and I really think that he deserves the props, because it really was difference maker in a lot of those games, the consistency that he brought. And then Diplex as well ends up playing really, really well the overall series. Like, even giving away some of the champions that Insanity feels more comfortable playing with, he ended up just not caring at all and bringing forth his own pool to be able to fight him and win against him. So I feel like Tomio deserves the biggest praise because of the really good series that he pulled up, and then Diplex as well, because he was really consistent, and then here, even after losing against the same player, he comes back and just wins against him really convincingly.
Yeah, I almost want to look at this series because you talked about how this was a rematch for both of these teams, and sometimes that can almost break a team. You lose to a team 3-1 fashion. Honestly, was not even that close in that series, the first series. So you lose to them pretty convincingly, drop to the lower bracket, have to fend off a tough TL team. You could come up if you're C9 challengers and just kind of lose your mental, and just think we're lost from the get-go. But I think you highlighted perfectly, TDS. This is a team that got their weakest performers to overperform. They played Maokai incredibly well, and they played around that pick. And yeah, they found Tomio's little niche. And I like best of fives because it's almost a little microcosm of a split, right? It's not the entire split's worth of metas and ever-evolving champion pools. It's one best of fives. Let's find out how we want these 5 games to look. And they figured it out first, right? They found out the Maokai. Dig didn't really seem to catch on, and they found the picks that worked best, and they were just better on the day. So huge congrats to C9C, because making your way through the lower bracket and winning it is not easy at all, but they did.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for sure about the difference in performance versus the first series they played against each other. I think Fake God especially, you have to look at having a massively different performance against Hoon in this final than he did in the Winterside final. Particularly that game 3, right? They give Hoon the Jace. Fake God plays the Renekton into it and holds his own just fine. He's able to be a flanker in the later game. He's able to be successful. He doesn't give up any kills or even any... he doesn't give up any deaths, period, to anybody on Dignitas, and he doesn't give over any gold. The whole team doesn't give over any kills or assists to Hoon in particular, and Hoon's Jace has been something that nobody was letting through. Hoon, the last time I went to check the statistics, which was coming into top 6, I think, Hoon there was a 100% ban rate on Hoon's Jace. Nobody was willing to give Hoon this champion, given how dominant he's been in lane with it and across the board. And they give it over in this game 3, and Cloud9 still manages to win. And at that point, it's oh, wow, all right. So the rules of engagement against Dignitas so far have been, well, you got to ban the Jace. And now that those are out the window, it really gives Cloud9 the opportunity to crunch down and take the series.
And the other side of the coin for things that you have to do in run of show versus Dignitas is Respect Insanity, one of the top prospects, I think, in the league, and someone that we've highlighted very consistently throughout the regular split alongside playoffs. But here he's up against Diplex, who I think we all collectively agree should not be in NACL whatsoever. And, for as much as there was kind of a narrative arc in the top side of the map where, Dig Challengers comes out to win game 1, Hoon looked really good in their own right on a Renekton pick of their own. And Fake God maybe was struggling a little bit, I believe, on Cassante. But eventually it started to turn into Fake God handling, I think, the pressure a lot better. Tomio as well, I think, was able to rally with that top jungle continuity quite nicely to just put a little bow on that discussion that we've been having since the beginning of the season. But, mid lane, Diplex was never off. Diplex was just constantly a central source of carry potential for C9C. And if there's one player that I think from minute one knew what to do in order to put Dig down a peg, it was him. So congratulations to them for such an impressive performance. I really enjoyed seeing it.
The other thing that really confused me this series was Dignitas is like, it felt like they really tunneled on this Draven pick into the Zeri. Yeah, they played Draven all 3 of the first games. They played in their win as well. And I mean, I was saying even coming into game 2, I'm pretty sure there's evidence for it in our Discord chat here. Even coming into game 2, I was like, you gotta get Spawn off this Draven, man. Like, this is not even in game 1, he's 5k gold ahead of anybody else on the map because he gets that one big Draven shutdown after farming all game. He gets like 2,000 gold off of a single kill.
1,600, by the way.
That was just the cash out too, plus the 300 for the kill,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
so
okay,
it was,
okay,
yeah. So it was 1,900.
It was 1,000 gold, yeah.
Yeah,
True.
it was a lot of freaking money off one kill. Let's say that. I think it was on Tomio or on Fake God or somebody. He gets it on. And even at that point, right, he's like a full item and a half ahead of everybody else on the map, and he is just like not finding angles to step up and throw axes at people. It is still like tough for them to win the game, even when their Draven is that far ahead. And after that, I was just like, I don't know if this Draven is it for Spawn. I think he needs his range. I think he needs his like peel tools and stuff. He's looked way better on stuff like the Aphelios and stuff throughout the season. But instead they run it back on the Draven for 2 more games, and it does not go that well in those games. And I think by the time they switch back, it's like a little bit too late. I don't know. That clearly they like something happened in scrims over the intermediary week or whatever, where they were just or like they think a lot of their recipe for beating Cloud9 was about shutting down Lost, because they did manage to take out Lost in their win and the winner's side finals. So I don't know, one of the two, maybe both of the two in combination. Either way, didn't love the Draven priority, did not work out for them.
I'm planting a flag right here, right now for a future Spice Mine episode. I have many thoughts on Draven as a pick. I do think that it is almost mathematically always correct to prioritize this champion, particularly into something like the Zeri, but you have to perform on it, and Draven is a champion that I think has such bizarre boundaries as to like when you can go hard and when you have to sit back and just wait for an opportunity to get a big cash out. And unfortunately, because that's such a difficult water to navigate versus Zeri, where you got one opportunistic team fight where your team is peeling for you and you can press R and boom, all of a sudden you're 5 kills ahead. It's just kind of tough. And unfortunately, Dignitas just had other problems, other places where they were pressured, I think, throughout the series, to where you couldn't focus on this Draven. You couldn't shot call and build a team around the Draven in the way that I was hoping to see. And, eventually the performance just not being there meant that it was a crucial mistake, and one that I'm glad that Gordo highlighted, because it just contributes to the fact that this ultimately was a pretty dominant series from C9 once again. Obviously not to the same degree as me saying and Gordo saying that it was a virtual 3-0 for C9 over TL, but certainly this does not look like the Dignitas that very similarly ransacked C9's champion pool and did such a great job putting them into losers in the first place.
And I kind of want to mention the fact of the Draven here, or to bring forward the fact of the Draven, because one thing that was so clear in the first game compared to the other 2 games is the way that Sinan handled it and the way that Dig handled it. Because on the first game, you can see that Dig put every bit of resources around Draven being a champion. Like, even without the shutdowns, right? They were pushing through tier 1 and 2 bot lane, giving the gold to Spawn as much as possible, even without any, like, cash in from the Draven. The farm prioritization went to the Draven as well. And I think that they played around the bot lane in a really effective manner, trying to deny as much as possible any angles that Sinan could find. I think that Sinan's comp wasn't necessarily bad, but I feel like the way that they played around it to try and minimize the impact from the Draven wasn't really that great. When you see the next games, like against the Swain, Draven, even if he out attacks, he's going to be hitting essentially a big drain shield that is just going to consistently be on top of you. And then you add on top of that the Soraka that was healing him. So even though Draven was trying to find value, there was never ways for him to really magnify his damage. I think that's the best word to use there. And in the third game, they shut him down completely. So I feel like throughout the series, Sinan managed to find the right ways to handle the Draven, much more so than they find the ways to keep the Draven being an active factor. And it really showed at the end when they had to pivot away from the Draven.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And going back to the same way we talked about TL promotions, I want to talk a little bit about a Dig promotion here. I've brought it up before, but I think next split should be Hoenn time for Dignitas LCS, man. I mean, why not? Like, they're not... I don't think that this team is making a huge turnaround and is going to suddenly be, best team in the LCS. I don't think they're going to be top 6. I think they're very much at risk of not even being top 8. Give Hoenn his chance, right? I mean, Armut's looked like probably the worst top in the LCS. Pretty close. He takes up the same import slot that Hoenn would take up. I mean, I'm not crazy about these imports in Academy, but I guess if there's any place where it can work out, it's when they're behind an import in LCS. I don't know, give Hoenn his chance. I mean, they got better with Spawn, or subbing in with Tomio, and I think they could make another upgrade here at top.
I think you bring them all in. I think you just go full Dig C roster in the LCS. How much worse can you get than Dignitas, man?
Dude, I said this at midseason. You weren't here, Bonfire, but that is what I said at midseason when they decided to just sub in Tomio. I was like, just put in the whole roster. Like, what are you gonna do? You're already 0-9. You're not gonna run you're not gonna win 8 games and sneak into playoffs.
Worst case scenario, they get 10th, which is exactly what they got this split. I don't see an issue. Win-win scenario.
I'm looking for the Moneyball style documentary film about how they just decide off of some general manager's whim, maybe from listening to this podcast, to just completely hard swap a roster like that, and all of a sudden they're top of the LCS or something. I think that would be beautiful. And Bonfire, you said that you had some Lucas takes that weren't paying off, but clearly you're on the Bonfire train all the way to the station when it comes to Dignitas. So I think this, combined with the extra weight that our wonderful host with the most Gordo brings to the table in his own statement about the Dignitas swap, it's getting me on board. Just go crazy, blow the whole roster up. Why not?
To try and be the reality check here, I remind you guys, they have to pay them a big salary to these players. I don't think any of the starting members from Dig are cheap. So yeah. I don't think they're blowing that up just because of the cost.
So the cost, I think, actually might not be as much. Most contracts pay less when you're benched or on Academy. I'm pretty sure.
They have that sort of clause?
My understanding is most of the contracts do have that sort of clause, but I don't know if that's the case for Jensen and Santorin, and they're Jensen and Santorin, man. I think they'll probably keep them in no matter what. I think Ignar might be on the chopping block. The only problem is that I mean Diamond is out of the other 4 members of this team. I think Diamond is pretty low towards your list of people you want to promote up, just because he's been around for so long and his last stint in LCS was not that great. But I mean, I think he might be on the table as well. I think XU and Insanity, unlucky roll there, boys. You're backing up Jensen and Santorin. They're probably gonna they're gonna be staying in no matter what. I think Jensen in particular. I think Jensen actually had quite a good split. I think he's just elo held. So I would be surprised to see Jensen moved.
I will say, I don't think Dig is the only team. I want to say just quickly that this has been, I think, the most exciting. I don't know if it's just because I'm watching it more because of this podcast, but I do think for casual fans and for the NA, region as a whole, this split has been pretty amazing. And I'm not sure if that's because of the people have almost paved the way. You think of Busio in the last split, Busio, Ayla, Harry, Jan, all coming up being really excitable prospects, almost like traditional sports, right? You get really excited to see your favorite teams draft players and bring them up to the best level, and you want to see how they do, potential. I feel like you hear that word a lot, potential. And I feel like those 4 really brought forth the idea that maybe you go young and you go local and good things can happen. And I feel like this split, you start to see the dividends, because suddenly there's conversations about let's bring up people before we import, which is, I think, awesome. I'm very excited to hear that. And it's not just niche diehards like us. I'm just seeing casual people, underneath team accounts on Twitter, saying like, bring up this from the challengers. It can't get much worse, which is very neat, and I think that's cool, and it makes me happy.
Yeah, I think you got to give. I think you got to give the credit to that to Peter Dunn first, though. I think JoJo Danny really started this trend, but
good point. Yes, good point.
But I do agree, and I hope it keeps on going. Especially 100 Thieves got to rally at the end there. I was getting kind of worried that it's like, and Jan I think looks good too, even though the rest of the team is not doing as well. But I was getting a little worried there for a little bit. I was like, oh man, all 5 of the rookies can't bust, right? That would be really rough. And I don't think they did. I think Buzio really stepped up towards the end. I think Jan still looks good. Ayla's in a weird position where like he looks worse than Winsome somehow. I don't know what's going on there. I hope he turns it around as well.
Yeah.
I have three things to say now because of the Winston thing, but just a quick thing. I have a theory that maybe Prince just just trying to pull down Ayla so that they bring back Winston for some reason, but that's just like a theory.
Prince is sabotaging Ayla. That's really
I will say it happens. Like I've seen that in normal sports, so I know that
Prince
could end up
him?
happening. Just saying it can happen. Like they do that a lot, particularly to coaches, but that can happen to players as well. The other thing I wanted to say, I honestly forgot. I just wanted to say like
I'll just say from how expensive Prince is, if you hear some talks about how much his contract is worth, I think Prince just has to ask nicely, and he could probably have Winsome in. I don't think he has to be going through this whole song and dance.
Sense. But it takes away from the spiciness of why Ayla is not performing the best. So I want to believe. I want to keep my theory alive. And also I wanted to say like you could be like you guys that want to see the talents prop up like in the normal traditional way, see all the good talent coming up through the pipeline, or be like me and just trial by fire. Get a guy and throw them into the LCS and see what happens. Watch the world burn after that. That's the way that I want to see things. Just bring them up the harsh way. Let's go.
EDS had 3 substantive points right there. Well, one of them was I forgot, but 2 2.5 substantive points, and somehow managed to dodge any amount of like specific Colombian soccer references throughout. So props to him. Clearly, he's doing a good job keeping that under wraps. But guys, we're talking a lot about, I think, players now. We're looking at the LCS prop. We're looking at endorsements, people moving up and stuff. But I really want to zoom back into this best of 5 really quick. And I gotta say, I don't think that C9C are the definitive champions of this NACL split, man.
Oh.
Let's hear. Is this the?
Can you say more, Mr. Nyarko?
Is this the bracket reset argument?
This is
coming in.
This is certainly the bracket reset argument coming in. I'm just saying, man, you don't win Evo by coming from losers bracket and then winning 1 best of 5. You win Evo by resetting the whole freaking bracket and winning 2 back-to-back best of 5s. And while yes, it has been pointed out to me exhaustively on Twitter that this is not really feasible from a League of Legends perspective, I'm gonna say I think it's vaguely feasible with a wholly online format. Just add another day to the broadcasting. It isn't like Rally Cry's doing anything better with their time. Get the reset going, drum up hype, right? Like have 2 days, have the clips being advertised on Twitter overnight. You're gonna draw in a lot of viewers and whatnot. But honestly, the other side of this whole thing, and this may be the even like more hot take coming out of the I want a bracket reset or something similar. I don't like double elimination, and I'm kind of convinced I don't like double elims now after this split.
Why stop at 2? Why stop at 2 series? What if it's a best of 7, and they have to go? So they have to win 4 out of 3 best of 7s. I think that's the best way to go.
Best of 19.
There we go. That's how we really determine when the first to live or the last to be alive after being strapped to their chair, no food, no water, League of Legends. There we go. That's the true way.
I'm going to do the debaterly thing here and come up as the prime minister in my rebuttal speech and say something along the lines of Bonfire has clearly demonstrated the point I'm trying to make. So I thank the opposition for this opportunity. Guys, if we all admit that best of 5s are not the best way to determine that a team is definitively the top of any single division or any single league, why is it the case that we even have double elims? Because I don't think that it really adds to the argument that one team is definitively better than the other. If they go on a loser's bracket run, if they go on a winner's bracket run, etc., just go back to single elim, and then we could spin all the narratives we want, and they're going to be a lot cleaner than anything we get from a situation where we don't have something like a bracket reset, and you have fully split games between two teams at the top.
Jokes aside, I will say, Mr. Prime Minister, that I do respectfully disagree with your position, just in the sense that I think that working your way up through the lower bracket, I think is difficult enough. I don't think that many teams do that. I'm struggling to rack my brain. I think G2 working their way up through the lower bracket's the only other team I could think of just off the top of my head. But I don't like single elim because I think it's just one bad day can really ruin everything. And so I think this was I think it was the fine way to do it. I think it's unfortunate that they had to, obviously see the same team twice, but it's happened before, and it will happen again. And it's just, just the way the bracket is. But I think this is the best way to do it when it comes to tournaments. Me personally.
I would be happy if we saw a true losers bracket run, but Bonfire, how many games did C9 actually play in losers bracket? They faced off against TL, and that was it, wasn't it? Like,
Yeah.
unless I'm missing something, I just feel that that's not really a run. That isn't necessarily a substantively harder pathway to victory, and especially because of the proximity between C9 and Dig from their first series to their second series in playoffs. For me, the issue that I have is like, these aren't different teams, right? We aren't seeing a development or like a rallying point for C9 once they were sent to losers. They just beat a team that they were clearly better than, and then they come back for another high variance best of 5. And I think that, like I said before, we can all agree that a best of 5 isn't the best representative of like how a team actually performs. But then they come back for that, and then they end up winning, and we crown them champions. It just feels bad, especially for Dignitas.
Like, I think it's tough to really call out if it's the best or not the best way. I feel like there's way too much varying opinions on this because, like you're pointing out, like the argument I always like get to when they say why they don't like double aim is the fact that is it really fair to the upper bracket team because they play just one more series and then you get 2 chances, meanwhile the winner just get 1, and then you really cannot compare if it was really the advantage of that one day, whereas they get more extra time to play and get more warm and things like that. So I'm more, I will say I'm more on the side of double aim particularly because I really couldn't care less if teams are going to play more or not, if they are going to be more relaxed or not, if they are going to get an extra chance or not, because there's like, and I've always said the same thing about sports. There's nothing fair. You just play, and whoever wins wins. Whoever loses loses. That's it. Fairness doesn't exist. Point. After that, you go into the actual bracket manner, and I feel like for trying to see who the better team was, it's closer to just single elim, and that's really what I care about. I really couldn't care less about if Dixie should get an extra benefit or not. I want to see who the better team is. And double elim gives you a closer approach to who the better team is because you're getting not only more chances to see teams perform, but also if C9C lost to Dixie alone, that means that the only real competitor to C9C was Dixie anyway. So even if they go against in the finals, and once again, if Dixie wins against them, then they are clearly a better team. But if C9 wins against them, then C9 should be contesting for that better team spot. Even if it's not fair for Dixie, it's still clear that either of the two deserve to be the best team. So it's not really like outrageous to think that C9C winning is unfair to DXC because it could have happened as well. It's kind of what I'm getting at with the best team to me, but that's my argument for why I like double elimination. So it's really difficult to know what ends up being the best course of action. And honestly, I just care for having more games and more chances to see who the better team is.
Yeah, I think so, and I think we'll agree. I think a best of 5 isn't a perfect way to determine who the better team is overall. I think it's an effective way of determining who's the better team on the day, and that's really the best you can hope for, unless you're going for like a season-long format or something where you have to play a large number of games over a large period of time. And generally, especially in an entertainment sports league like this, the goal is, to build up to that big moment where one team's going to win and one team's going to lose. And you know it based on the day rather than, potentially locking it in earlier or playing a large number of games over a long period of time or anything like that. I will also say, I think the main benefit of the double elim bracket, I think it's really more for the fans than for anything else, in that a double elim bracket should in theory guarantee you a more competitive final. Otherwise, you're at the risk of initial seeding having serious influence over the quality of your big end of season game. As we've seen at Worlds a number of times, right? There's been a lot of World Championships where the real final was played in the semis, and the grand final ended up being very disappointing as a result. And I think double elim's a good way to avoid that. So that's kind of where I come from on it as well.
There's certainly ups and downs, but from a World's perspective, I don't think I would trade T1 versus DRX for anything, and I almost can guarantee you that would not happen, right?
That's a fallacy, though. You don't trade it for something else, right? If you had a double elim bracket, then there would be some other 6 series in the lower bracket that we would all be talking about. Like, damn, man, imagine if single elim denied us this series. Like, there would be a million series. No, there will be great series in any format. I think you should really talk about it as a more kind of objective hypothetical than pointing to specific examples, because you never, and if we didn't have double elim here, don't forget TL gets eliminated in round 2 where they get 2-0'd by Cloud9. That's the other problem here, right?
Well, really, when you look at it from another perspective to what Nyarko is saying with the story from DRX, right? There's more examples of better series with double elim than better series with single elim, because look at just recently. You get the T1 KT series on the LCK, and now you get the narrative that, what about if we get that again in the finals? Or the 3-2 BLG, JDG versus BLG in LPL. You get more consistent narratives for double elim, having way better series, not only in the final, but in general, because now you don't miss out on a team because of single elim. You get to see them twice and see the turnaround that they can bring forward. I always, this is one of the examples that always is brought forward in 2018 with KT and IG, right? The fact that the final before the actual final, where they just 3-2 could have been a double elim angle, and then maybe they come back, they win it against IG. I don't think so. IG was a better team overall in that year, and it was a KT fine. But it's more so the narratives that you can build off of in the same tournament than something that you have to create because of the single elim deleting everything that you maybe expected out of a team. I think that there's better angles with the double elim than just the single elim, honestly.
I think that I could see that, and I understand that I'm probably always going to be losing in terms of popular consensus on single elim versus double elim.
You would be surprised, though.
But I know there are people on my side. I still think that the old GBA 99 video on this topic is actually a pretty well researched and well put argument for why we should maintain single elim, especially for something like Worlds. But I'll refer people to that if they want my full thoughts on it, rather than trying to belabor the point on the podcast, because this is only kind of half of my point, right? If it is the case that we are here to stay with double elim, should something be done about grand finals in order to put things in favor of the ones who made it through winners bracket? Because sure, maybe double elim has its benefits, but this isn't changing the fact that C9C lost to a team with the same record that they then beat them with in grand finals. And I don't understand why one of those best of fives is somehow weighed more than the other one when it comes to placement. Because sure, yeah, maybe for us who are heavily in franchise, we can sit here and say, yeah, I think that both of these teams are evenly matched. There's a competitive argument for either one of them being the definitive best team in the NACL. But for marketing purposes, for payouts, for those who aren't as deeply entrenched in the NACL, it feels disingenuous for us to herald C9C as definitive champions of this split and, give them payouts to match things like that.
I think that if anything should be done to the grand finals, I think it should just be a 1-game advantage, right? Dixie starts up 1-0 up, and that's how it should go. I think making it because you brought up, I don't know if it was in the Discord or if it was during the podcast, but you talked about how in the fighting game community there's a bracket reset and you have to win basically 2 best of 5s in a row. I think that is exhaustive, and I think that in a quest to find out the best team, like it'll just be. I mean, that's why I made the joke earlier about like just strap them to chairs and have them play like best of 100, you know? Because it's just, I mean, both of these teams when they're so close, it's just way too impossible to tell. And it's the same. That's true for professional sports. I think we come across this a lot. Like you know, for all my what 2 professional sports fans who also like League of Legends out there, March Madness just happened, and people are already saying like, "Hey, UConn are not a real champion because they didn't really play anybody that difficult." Well, all the best teams dropped out earlier, so it's you know, there's always going to be people saying that the real winner is not the real winner, and so I think that if you have it like 2 best of 5s, if you have it like you come up with all these different concoctions, I still think people are going to say like, well, that's unfair to one team. I think it just comes down to like, if you're going to do anything, give them a 1 game advantage. Congrats, you made it through the winners bracket. You have a little advantage. But I just think if you get too crazy with it, it's just not going to matter. People are always going to complain about the winner. That's sports fans for you.
And I do think that what you're kind of getting at here is that a bracket reset isn't viable, and I am pretty convinced that that is the case. And I think the argument that kind of sways me is, while, yeah, from an online tournament perspective, I don't really see any reason why we can't just have a bracket reset and then just spread grand finals out over 2 days if it comes to pass. But obviously then it becomes an issue of, if LCS wants to run double elim, but now they have to rent out like a convention hall or they have to rent out like a stadium, it would suck to have an actual bracket reset because nobody's playing 2 best-of-5s in a day. But then you have a different system than what exists in the NACL, and I think that people will complain about that because obviously the extent to which you skew the outcome in favor of the people on the winners bracket side varies from a 1 game advantage versus a bracket reset scenario. But to clarify, my statement is still, yeah, I think that we should change how grand finals are done. But the thing that sways me the most is kind of like what you're alluding to. Bonfire was also recommended by Shaunatonin when I was engaging in this discussion on Twitter, where he recommended we run a best-of-7, but we give a game advantage over to the winner side. So at most, we're playing 1 more game if it goes the full series. And I think that that seems like a perfectly cromulent way to kind of balance out my concerns with equity and whatnot, while also keeping things like realistic and entertaining.
And just quick funny point, you could argue you could make it so that the team on the winners final just takes out a player for the first game and that's their advantage, and then the rest of the series they played with the rest of the 5 players. That would be like another angle to maybe look at it. But realistically, it's just that I understand the idea that if you have a similar record with the teams that you're going against here, then you should have an advantage for then being able to be on the like upper finals and things like that, right? But that's where I come back with the angle of like there really isn't fairness in anything. Like in sports, fair isn't real. There's no fairness in a lot of stuff. So I feel like even if that should be the case, realistically it won't happen because it also takes away from the entertainment factor that a lot of people enjoy from the sports. And it's the fact that you go in equally, even though it's not really equally, but you go in equally, and then the one that came from below wins. And the narrative is that the one that came from below the lower bracket wins. And that's how they build it up. And that's the entertainment factor. And I think that it's not going to take away, because you don't want to take away from the entertainment from the spectators, like Gordo was saying. And that's a lot of what I feel like gives more to the spectators, much more so than the fairness of the teams. And it may affect the integrity of the competition, but integrity of competition has been affected since the start. So I don't think that it's going to change if you want to change it now, really.
I think to close, all I'm going to say is shout outs to Dignitas, shout outs to C9, co-champions in my heart.
Co-champions.
Second
Yeah,
place.
that's the most
That'll
entertaining
go over
result
well.
right there. Yeah, 5-5 co-champions. Put those points aside. Let's talk a little bit about MVP before we close out here. So the broadcast does crown their MVP. For those who were maybe not paying especially close attention, they nominated them from 5 to 1 and made little videos about all of them, which, by the way, I really appreciate. I like that they kind of go bottom up and reveal who their favorite prospects are throughout the split. So it is in this order. It is Prismal, then Yukino, then Copy, then Masu, and then the most valuable prospect award goes controversially over to Mir. So to give some background, right, quite a few folks have spoken up on Twitter and elsewhere to say, hey, you know, Mir's played in LCK, he's gone to Worlds representing Osh before, and now he comes over to NA Academy. Can he really be determined as a prospect, right, as an award that is in theory intended for a developmental piece, especially when it's been pretty publicly stated that Unforgiven was not in contention. So wanna talk about that a bit on the pod. I have my own take, but I want to hear you guys first.
I think that I understand the argument, right? When somebody's had this success, obviously you don't want to. I mean, it's not even about rewarding. It's just you want to reward other players, and maybe some who haven't gotten that attention before, and this is their first split, yada yada yada. I understand that talking point. I think my counterpoint would be that Mir might have gone to Worlds, but he was never like a star player for any teams. He was not a household name. He came to Team Liquid not as a LCS player that came down. Unforgiven was Double Lift's replacement. The whole idea was he came as Double Lift doesn't do well, it's Unforgiven's time. He was the reigning MVP from the LEC. And so
First
I
team
think
All-Pro. MVP was Niski. But
did Unforgiven not win MVP at one point?
No, he was
Okay.
All-Pro. He's first team All-Pro, but MVP was
First team
Niski.
All-Pro. First team All-Pro. Thank you. First team All-Pro for the MVP's team. May I add, went to Worlds as well, where he got eliminated by NA. Shout out EG.
Woo!
Woo! These colors don't run, baby. The point I'm trying to make, this is long-winded, but the point I'm trying to make is I think Mir deserves the award. I think that he really put himself on the map with this. And I think the Unforgiven thing wasn't about his accomplishments. It was more about his namesake and what he was brought in to do. Mir was always brought in as an academy player. There was no conversation that he was going to maybe fill in for Piosik. I mean, Piosik was the jungler, right? And so I think that he deserves this. And I think that what we do need is a better understanding of what this award is, because I think just talking about, well, he shouldn't get it and he does, I think there need to be real clear stipulations on what you need to do if you win this award. Because rookie of the year in the NBA and the NFL and traditional sports leagues, there is a clear definition. There's a certain amount of games you can't play or need to play in order to get it. And that's why Ben Simmons won it in the second year, and everyone was confused about that, but there are clear rules. And so I think there need to be clear rules because obviously people are confused.
I had a similar approach to Bonfire until I realized, and I'm sorry for this, guys. I legitimately didn't know for the whole of the split, by the way. So you can roast me, burn me, whatever the hell, but Mir is Arthur.
Yeah,
and that
Mir is
changes
Arthur.
everything. Like, yeah, that's I didn't know that for the whole of the split. Like, I'm sorry, guys. You can flame me. I trolled heavily. I didn't realize that Mir was Arthur, and that changes everything because Arthur not only has played with Hanwha in LCK, he played with Hanwha in Worlds. Like, that's different from playing with OCE. Like, I understand OCE to a certain degree. He went with Hanwha to Worlds. That's a way different thing than just OCE. So yeah, I don't think Mir #1 makes a lot of sense after that. Well, Mir Arthur. Now I'm just like perplexed. I didn't even realize it was Arthur. So yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense prospect, because a prospect that at least through my understanding, and that's where I agree with Bonfire, there needs to be better like understanding of where they are evaluating this sort of things. But is a prospect really a player that has, even if unsuccessfully, performed in the biggest stage of the world for the game? Is that really a prospect at this point? Like, he's already a player. He has already have a pretty, not substantial, but at least long enough career that would rival a lot of the normal players you've seen, because he's played more than 5 years, or at least 5 years.
I think he's played 4 years, but yeah.
4 years, okay.
It's been a long
Yeah,
time.
quick maths. Bad. Never do maths on podcast or cast. But yeah, 4 years. That's 4 hour standards, not a short career. At least for League of Legends standards, it's not a short career. So really, I don't think that it should fall into the prospect category. That I do understand now why the discourse was so big, and it's a failure on my part because I really didn't know it was Arthur. Wow.
Oh, so I'm going to preface this by saying I am on board with you, TDS. Not about not knowing that this was Arthur. I
mean,
think
who
I at
didn't
least
know
did
that it was
amount of
Arthur,
research
right?
to
I
start.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry.
I
But
didn't know it was Arthur.
But I agree that I'm also not super on board with Mir taking MVP or MV prospect, just as clarification purposes. It's an odd title. But I think that at the same time, a defense can be made for this sort of selection because I think we're kind of in the too much of a traditional sports mind when it comes to how we define prospects. And the reason behind that is that there's just a far more systematized way in which we can determine who's a prospect coming out of high school, coming out of college. There's a very large pool of talent scouts. There's a very clear discourse that allows for people to build up a narrative around a player from when they're very young. The thing with League of Legends is that we don't have that same kind of very systematized birth into the pro leagues. And therefore, I think that trying to determine who's a prospect, with some exceptions, I think Sniper is a good example of that. Griffin, maybe as well, is another person you could consider a prospect. Outside of those kinds of players, I think that it's very difficult for us to define what an actual prospect is until they hit the NACL proper and they get scouted and analyzed on the front of whatever local league that they're in. So with that in mind, I think that as long as they're in the NACL, it is justifiable to name someone and call someone a prospect, even someone ancient, right? If Wild Turtle popped off this season or something and stayed in ACL, they could have been a prospect. Who's to say, right? Especially because we are at a point in time where I think there's a sea change regarding the maximum age and the length of careers that people expect out of esports athletes.
Thank
And
God.
frankly, it's kind of a good thing in that realm that you can have someone who's been playing for 4 years and you can still call them a prospect, right?
Yeah, I think also, I think it also comes down to like where do you draw that line? Because I think it's not obviously the same conversation, but copy has been like do former LCS players not reach that standard? Like what if somebody gets an MVP and comes back down? And so I understand like the whole Worlds argument. Is Worlds the decider? I mean, that's where it just comes down to we need more clarification and like actual this in writing, because I understand the argument, but then it's like, well, where's the line drawn? Is copy okay? Is Unforgiven okay? What about somebody like Fake God, like, has been in the LCS for quite a while? Where's the line get drawn?
Or
And
Hunter.
so, well, yeah, exactly, or Hunter. And so, I think that the fact that he was at Worlds with HLE 2 years ago or 3 years ago is kind of crazy, and the fact that he got rookie is kind of crazy. But I think it actually adds to my point of where's the line? Where do people draw the line? And I think there just needs to be more clarity.
Just a quick thing. I want to just because I just realized it wasn't. He was with Hanwha, but he wasn't in Worlds that year. Yeah, just to clarify, because I do remember he's split with Hanwha. He was really bad, but I do remember it. He went with Worlds just with the OC. Okay.
Yeah,
Just
he was
to
a sub
clarify there.
at Worlds that year. Yeah, but that team was hard carried by Chovy too, right? That was the Chovy.
Yeah,
on the
but
late
like
team.
he wasn't really a
He
part
wasn't
of
even
it
playing.
in that run, in the run to Worlds. Like I saw the what is it called, the regionals, and it was Yuhan and Wheeler that were there, not Arthur at that point.
Oh, he didn't even
They
go.
got rid of
All
Arthur.
right, well.
No, that's exactly. I thought the same because I remember his year in that. He was bad, but yeah, it wasn't with Hanwha. It was with the OC. I remember now.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
clarification.
yeah, and the other thing is, right, I think I do to some degree appreciate the degree of flexibility they have with crowning MVP. I do think, like, the fact that it's even called MVP, right, is like they're immediately blurring the lines. Like, I think you just, like, I think maybe you should just introduce a rookie of the split or something, the way that LCS does, right? Just give a rookie, maybe don't call it rookie of the split, call it newcomer of the split or something, because they're not true rookies. They'll be rookies in the pro league, not in the minor league. But, something like that, and then MVP can be, best player in NACL or something like that.
Yep.
Or, most likely to be promoted or something like that. Because I do think, I was pretty on board with giving it to Dokla a year ago, right? And even though Dokla had previously played an LCS in Optic and had played a bunch of splits in Academy, on Optic Academy and TSM Academy, before being dropped down to amateur, and then he came back up and played on TL Academy, and then he played on CLG Academy, where he finally won his most valuable prospect. Like, I think that was deserved, right? He had a huge turnaround and had pretty much reinvented himself as a player. And I mean, and like the turn, like the title most valuable prospect has like become true, right? Like Dokla was an outside All Pro contender for top lane this split, from having been playing an amateur like a year before. That's a crazy turnaround, right? And you know, he really was the most valuable prospect that year in that sense, in that he did come to LCS and he was incredibly valuable there, and he has netted CLG quite a few wins. And with that said, I do want to call out here. I think some of that, like, and this is not to hate on the broadcast. I love the broadcast guys. I really like most of what they've done this split with content and everything. But they do have it, like, they do love to bring up their criteria, and their criteria is just, like, it's just BS, man. I'm gonna be honest with you here. Like, their criteria is, like, if you were to promote this player to the LCS, how many wins would they get you in the next year? And then the year after that, how many wins would they get you? And those wins count as double. And it's like, what are you just tell me who you think the best prospect is, man. Like, how are you trying to calculate the number of wins they're going to earn in 2 years on a mystery team? Like, what is that? There's no way you're doing, like, there's no, like, that's such pseudoscience. There's no way you're doing that in any like meaningfully reliable or scientific way. Just say who you think has the most potential and like be honest about it. It's like it's weird that they bring this up so often as like their supposedly objective criteria when it's really just who do we think has the most potential but with extra steps.
But Gordo, what if Mir only had one arm and had to play with his feet? You never thought about that, did you? And that's why he's most valuable. God, just, you know, they know what they're doing, surely.
I can't wait for the Moneyball style documentary where people try to calculate the sabermetrical value of X player in a situation versus the norm, right? And that's how we determine MVP from now on, guys.
You could probably ask Forrest, and he's going to find a numerical value to determine that
true.
sort of thing for gangplank. So,
this.
yeah, exactly. I will say though, like thinking about the criteria, right? Even if it's MVP or for most valuable player, most valuable prospect, anything like that, the thing that surprises me most about Mir, apart from the fact that I didn't know he was Arthur, but apart from that, the thing that surprises me the most is the fact that when do they start counting for that? Because regular season Mir is not even a smidget of what playoff Mir was. So really, when do they start counting for that? Was that with regular season into account or just the games that they play for playoffs? But then Mir has more playoff games than essentially all the other players here. So like, where do you really start counting for these players and where do you really value them? It's kind of my weird thing because Mir, for just regular season, he is nowhere near close any of the other players in my eyes. Masu as well, regular season wise, probably falls down a bit, but that's outside conditions, but still falls down a bit. So it's really weird to me to see it like this.
Yeah, I don't think it's meant to be just a regular season award. I think it is meant to...
So it's in general.
I think it's supposed to factor in the first few rounds of playoffs. I also think it's like, that's the thing, right? Is because it's most valuable prospect and because it's how many wins you'll get a team in 1 year and how many wins you'll get them in 2 years with that weighted double. They don't feel the need, like, it's not a regular season award, right? It's not about who did the best in the regular season. It's about who will be the best. It's about who has the most potential, right? Like, again, it's that with a bunch of extra steps, but it's really about who do you think has the most potential to get wins in the LCS in the future. And I think they're willing to take all the games into account there. I don't think it's ostensibly a regular season award.
Then it gets even weirder because in that sense, then Diplex perfectly qualifies for that with just a few sample sizes, and he wins. So I would argue he should be here.
And like Perry's robbed, by the way. Like, it's crazy that Perry's not here at all.
Yeah, I would think Perry and Diplex should be here over either. I wouldn't say copy, but let's say the 4 and number 5. They deserve to be here. Diplex particularly to me. he really performed well in everything that he had to go here, and I think he's LCS level. He just simply was in the best LCS team that wanted to have an even better mid laner. That's unlucky.
If we're going to start voting for Diplex for MVP, I think that we should just recommend that all of our listeners refer back to our episode where we started crowning some of our superlatives in the regular season, and you just say, "Hey, that's our MVP." I think they translate relatively well over through the playoffs with a few alterations, but our completely arbitrary categorizations and standards, may actually be a better representation of who
We were
takes
100%
MVP than,
right.
yeah, than our system, than the system we saw for the actual NACL.
I wanted to bring this up just in case, but I know we don't have time. But I wanted to kind of think back to our initial ranking of all the teams and see back to how it ended up being. And you can really just see how crazy.
We'll do
how
that. Could
big
be
the
that could be
difference was.
supplemental content or something. We'll do like one episode for that. Maybe after we do promos next week, which
It's really
something special coming for promos next week. By the way, there will be some announcement on Twitter or something of what we're doing.
Look,
Yeah, I think that's our hour though. I mean, I don't think we don't want to keep everybody here too long, as that's gonna do it for our NACL split. We're gonna be back next week talking about promotions. I think back at our regularly scheduled time. By the way, we've definitely been on one day later for most of playoffs because the schedule changes. I think we'll be back to Thursday mornings next week. So we will see you guys there to talk about the promotion tournament, find out who may potentially be joining the NACL in the next split, and what changes that's going to bring as well. And then that's going to wrap up the whole split, baby, and we're probably going to take some break before we get into the summer and do it all again. But thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.